A lone wagon rolls into Millhaven, carrying a pregnant stranger into a town of whispers, judgment, and looming danger. Silas Vance must make a choice that will put him at odds with everyone around him. Will he protect her, or follow the law of the town? Stay tuned. What happens next will keep you on the edge of your seat. Through blizzards, threats, and the cruelty of others, the Vances show that integrity, love, and courage are what define heroes. We see that family is chosen, bravery has many forms, and compassion can conquer prejudice. Like, comment, share, and subscribe for more.
The wind off the Montana mountains was sharp enough to shave with. It was November 1878, the kind of morning that bit at your lungs. Silas Vance stood on the wooden platform of the Millhaven train station. He was a big man, quiet, shoulders like a barn door, with a face weathered by too many harsh winters and too much grief. Next to him, his younger brother George shifted from foot to foot, trying to stay warm, trying to fill the silence. "You really going through with this, Silas?" George asked. He pulled his collar up. "A mail-order bride just feels cold." Silas didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the tracks. "It is a contract, George," Silas said. His voice was flat, even. "The ranch needs a manager. We'll need someone looking out for him while I work. I am not looking for romance. I am looking for a fair exchange. That's all this is." A distant whistle cut through the frost. The train. Steam hissed. Iron groaned against iron. The great black engine rolled into the station, spitting soot into the pale morning sky. The doors opened. People started pouring out. Tired travelers. Drummers selling tonics. Then she appeared. She stood at the top of the passenger car steps. Abigail Stanton. She held a battered leather suitcase in one hand. She looked exhausted. Pale. But she held her chin high. She took a step down onto the platform. Right then, a heavy gust of wind whipped off the open plains. It caught the edges of her worn gray cloak. It blew the fabric wide open. There was no hiding it. She wasn't just tired. She was pregnant, 5 months at least. The swell of her belly was undeniable against the fabric of her simple dress. The entire platform froze. The morning chatter died in an instant. Women in fine hats gasped and covered their mouths. Men paused with their hands in their pockets, staring. It was 1878. A woman arriving alone, unmarried, and carrying a child was a scandal of the highest order. It was an outrage. Everyone waited for the explosion. They waited for the wealthy, respected Silas Vance to lose his temper, to shout, to throw her bag onto the tracks. George grabbed Silas by the arm. His fingers dug hard into the heavy canvas of Silas's coat. "Are you crazy?" George hissed. He didn't bother keeping his voice down. "Look at her, Silas. She snatched Edgewood goods. She lied to you. It's a complete disgrace. You have the right to send her right back where she came from. Tell her to get back on that train." Silas didn't move. For 10 long seconds, he just looked at the woman. Abigail didn't look away. Her hands were shaking inside her thin gloves. She was terrified, but she looked Silas dead in the eye. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize for existing. Silas pulled his arm free from his brother-esque grip. He didn't yell. He didn't turn red. He just stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He reached down and took the heavy, battered suitcase from her trembling hand. Then he turned to his brother. Silas spoke loud, clear. He made sure every single nosy person on that wooden platform heard every word. "Human beings are not commodities to be labeled damaged, George," Silas said. His voice cut through the cold air like a heavy blade. "A piece of paper does not give anyone the right to strip a woman of her dignity. She is a mother looking for a safe harbor. She is not merchandise to be returned. We do not discard people." George's jaw dropped. The whispering women fell dead silent. The men looked down at their boots. Silas turned back to Abigail. His blue eyes were calm. "The wagon is this way, miss," he said. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He just carried her bag toward the horses. Abigail pulled her cloak tight around her belly. She followed him through the crowd. The townspeople parted for them like water. She climbed up into the wooden seat of the wagon. Silas climbed up beside her and took the reins. He clicked his tongue, and the horses moved forward out of the station. Abigail sat quietly as the vast golden plains of Montana opened up before her. Her heart was still pounding. But as she looked at the broad, steady shoulders of the man beside her, a strange feeling washed over her. He hadn't bought her. He hadn't judged her. He respected her. And as the cold wind blew past them, she realized that was the one thing she hadn't expected to find at the end of the line. Dinner that first night was a quiet affair. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that rings in your ears. The heavy oak table could seat 10. Only 2 chairs were full. Silas sat at the head. Abigail sat to his right tight. The chair across from her was empty. That was Willis' chair. The boy had taken one look at Abigail, turned on his heel, and marched upstairs. He hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. His boots hitting the wooden stairs spoke loud enough. Silas didn't call the boy back. He just served the stew. Venison and root vegetables. Heavy food for cold weather. They ate in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of iron spoons against ceramic bowls, the wind rattling the window panes, the grandfather clock in the hall ticking away the minutes. Abigail ate slowly. She was starving, but her stomach was tied in knots. She watched Silas. He ate mechanically. He didn't stare at her. He didn't ask questions. He just fueled his body, like a man putting wood into a stove. When the meal was done, Abigail stood. She gathered the bowls. "Leave them," Silas said. His voice was low, rough like bark. "I can wash them," Abigail said. "I am not an invalid, Mr. Vance." Silas looked up. His blue eyes caught the lantern light. "I know you aren't, but you are tired. The wash basin is in your room. Get some rest." He stood. He walked out of the kitchen and down the hall. A door clicked shut. His study. Abigail washed the dishes anyway. The hot water felt good on her freezing hands. It gave her time to think, to brace herself. The house settled around her. The wood groaned. The wind howled. She dried her hands. She looked down at her swollen belly. 5 months. The baby fluttered, a light tap against her ribs. She couldn't wait until morning. She couldn't sleep in this man's house under a cloud of unspoken questions. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair to him. More importantly, it wasn't fair to her. She was done hiding. The clock struck midnight. Abigail walked down the dark hall. A thin strip of yellow light bled from under the study door. She raised her hand, her knuckles rapped against the thick wood. "Come in," Silas called out. She turned the iron knob and pushed the door open. The study smelled of tobacco, old paper, and leather. A fire popped in the hearth. Silas was sitting behind a massive desk. A heavy ledger lay open in front of him. A pen in his hand. A glass amber whiskey sat untouched to the side. He looked up. He set the pen down. He didn't look surprised. "Sit down, Miss Stanton," he said. Abigail walked to the leather chair opposite the desk. She sat. She kept her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't fidget. She didn't cry. The time for crying was months behind her. "I need to explain," Abigail said. Her voice was steady. It didn't shake. Silas leaned back in his chair. "I am listening." His name was Nathaniel Prescott, she said. The name tasted like Achamash in her mouth. Back in Ohio, we were engaged. I loved him, or I thought I did. When I found out about the child, I told him. I thought we would move the wedding up. I was a fool. Silas didn't interrupt. He just watched her. He panicked, Abigail continued. His family is wealthy. Shippers. A scandal was out of the question. He stopped coming around. Then, a week later, his lawyer came to my door. She took a breath, a deep anchoring breath. The lawyer had a contract and a bag of money. They wanted me to sign away my rights, to take the money, leave the county, and surrender the child to the Prescott family the day it was born. They wanted the heir. They didn't want the mother. Silas' jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek, but he stayed quiet. I refused, Abigail said. Her chin came up. So they went to work. They bought the town. They threatened my landlord. They bought the whisperings of the church ladies. No one would hire me. No one would sell to me. They wanted to starve me out, force me to sign. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. She laid it on Silas's desk. I wrote to Mildred Sterling, the marriage broker. I paid her my last $20. I told her my situation. I asked her to find a man out west, a man who needed a worker, a housekeeper, who wouldn't mind a child. She arranged the contract with you. Abigail looked Silas dead in the eye. She told me you knew. She explained my pregnancy to you, and that you had agreed. I only realized the truth when I saw your face on that train platform this morning. She lied to both of us. She took her commission, and she lied. Silence fell over the room, heavy, thick. Silas looked at the paper on his desk. He didn't pick it up. He looked back at Abigail. Why didn't you take the money? Miss Stanton? Silas asked. It would have been an easier life. Abigail's eyes flared. The fire in the hearth caught the spark in her gaze. She leaned forward. Because I didn't come here for charity, Abigail said. Her words were sharp, clear, ringing in the quiet room. The man who did this tried to use his wealth to buy my rights as a mother. But I am a human being, Mr. Vance. I have the right to autonomy over my own body and my child's life, no matter how society shuns me. I am telling you the truth because you have the right to know, and because I refuse to let anyone trample on my dignity any longer. She held his gaze. She didn't blink. She laid her humanity bare on his desk, and she dared him to look away. Silas didn't look away. He sat there for a long time. The clock ticked. The fire cracked. The wind beat against the glass. Then, Silas reached out. He picked up the glass of whiskey. He didn't drink it. He just held it. He looked at the amber liquid, then looked back at Abigail. This society is gravely mistaken in believing a woman's honor is defined by men, Silas said. His voice was no longer flat. It carried a deep, resonant weight. They measure a woman by her purity or her obedience. They are fools. Your honor is in your courage tonight, Abigail. You stood your ground against men who tried to buy your soul. He set the glass down. He pushed the crumpled paper back across the desk toward her. Keep that, Silas said. It is your proof. Not that I need it. I know a liar when I see one. You are not a liar. Abigail felt a sudden sharp ache in her throat. The tight coil in her chest snapped. She had been bracing for a fight. She had been bracing to be thrown out into the snow. Instead, she was seen. Thank you, Mr. Vance, she said softly. Silas, he corrected. If you are going to live under my roof, you will call me Silas. We figure the rest of this out tomorrow. Go to sleep. Abigail stood. She took the paper. She walked to the door. Abigail, Silas called out. She turned back. You did the right thing, he said, for you and for the child. Abigail nodded. She stepped out into the dark hall. The cold floor bit at her bare feet. But for the first time in 5 months, she didn't feel the chill. She walked to her room, climbed into the heavy quilt, and closed her eyes. She slept, deeply, safely. Morning came, crisp and bright. The Montana sun bounced off the frost, blinding white. Abigail woke early. It was habit. She dressed in a simple brown skirt and a thick wool sweater. She tied her hair back as she walked down to the kitchen. The stove was cold. She found the kindling. She built a fire. She found the coffee, ground the beans, and set the pot to boil. She found eggs and cured bacon in the pantry. By the time the sun fully cleared the eastern ridge, the kitchen smelled like a real home. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate. Will walked into the kitchen. He was 12 tall for his age, thin, but with broad shoulders that promised he would grow into a man just like his father. He had Silas-esque blue eyes, but right now, those eyes were hard, angry. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the stove. He looked at the table, set with 2 plates. He looked at Abigail.
My father makes the coffee,
Will said. His voice was cracking, caught between boy and man. I woke up early, Abigail said mildly. She flipped a strip of bacon. It hissed in the pan. I like to be useful. There's a plate here for you. I'm not hungry, Will snapped. He turned and walked out the back door. The hinges whined. The heavy wood slammed shut. The glass rattled. Abigail sighed. She didn't chase him. She didn't yell. She understood grief. She had seen enough of it in her father's medical tent during the war. Grief made people sharp. It made them mean. The boy was hurting. He thought she was here to replace his mother. He thought she was an intruder. Silas came down a few minutes later. He smelled of soap and cold water. He looked at the stove. He looked at the table. He took his seat. Will? Silas asked. Out back, Abigail said. She poured the coffee, set the mug in front of him. He said he wasn't hungry. Silas took a sip. Black, bitter. He'll eat when his stomach hurts more than his pride. Don't be too hard on him, Abigail said. She sat across from him. He's protecting his territory. That's natural, Silas grunted. He ate his eggs. He finished his coffee. He stood up. I have fences to check on the north ridge. I'll be gone most of the day. There is chopped wood in the shed. The pantry is full. If you need anything, write it down. I go into town on Fridays. I will be fine, Silas, she said. He nodded. He put on his heavy coat and his hat. He walked out the door. A moment later, Abigail heard the sound of hooves fading into the distance. The house was empty, just Abigail and Will. She washed the breakfast dishes. She swept the floor. She found a feather duster and started on the parlor. The house was well built, but it lacked a woman's touch. Dust coated the lampshades. The curtains were stiff with age. Around noon, she went upstairs. She needed to unpack her suitcase, put her few belongings into the heavy wooden dresser in her room. She walked down the hall. The door to Willis' room was cracked open. She didn't mean to look, but she did. Will was standing by the window. In his hands, he held a heavy gray wool coat. Her coat. She had left it draped over a chair in the hallway last night. Will's hands were in the pockets. He pulled something out, a crumpled piece of paper. Mildred Sterling's letter. Abigail stopped breathing. She watched through the crack in the door. Will unfolded the paper. He read it. His eyes moved back and forth. His brow furrowed. He read it again. He looked up. He caught her eye through the gap in the door. He didn't run. He didn't drop the paper. He just stared at her. A challenge. Abigail pushed the door open. She stepped into his room. She didn't look angry. She didn't snatch the letter away. You went through my pockets, she said. It wasn't a question, just a fact. Will held the letter up. His hand was shaking slightly, not from fear, from adrenaline. She lied, Will said. His voice was tight. This woman, the broker, she lied to my pa. She didn't tell him you were in the family way. That is correct, Abigail said. She stood her ground. She lied to him, and she lied to me. Will stepped forward. You re a cheat. You came here under false pretenses. You tricked him. Abigail shook her head, slowly, firmly. No, Will, I did not, she said. She pointed to the paper in his hand. Read it again. Read the second paragraph. Will looked down. He read out loud, mumbling. I have secured the contract with Mr. Vance. I did not mention your condition, as men out west are particular. Keep your mouth shut until the wedding is done. He looked back up, confusion warring with anger in his blue eyes. I received that letter 2 days before I boarded the train, Abigail said. Her voice was calm, measured. I didn't know she had hidden the truth until it was too late. I came here fully intending to tell your father the truth, which I did. Last night, Will's jaw clenched. You should have stayed in Ohio, maybe Abigail said. But I couldn't. She walked over to the small bed. She sat down on the edge. She looked up at the angry boy. No one has the right to rewrite someone else's truth for their own profit, Will, Abigail said. She spoke to him not like a child, but like a man, like an equal. Dietz strips away mutual respect. I am sorry my presence has disrupted your home, but you and I both deserve to live in a house built on the truth. Your father knows everything. He knows I was betrayed by a man. He knows I was lied to by the broker. He knows the truth. Will stared at her. The anger was fading. Not gone, but cracking. The logic was too sound. The proof was right there in his hand. He couldn't fight the paper. He looked at the letter. He looked at Abigail's swollen belly. He swallowed hard. The Adam's apple in his throat bobbed. Does it hurt? Will asked. The question slipped out, fast, unplanned. Abigail blinked. Does what hurt? Will pointed awkwardly at her stomach. The baby, when it kicks. Ma used to say I kicked her so hard I bruised her ribs. She said I was stubborn before I was even born. His voice cracked on the word Ma. He looked away quickly, staring at the floorboards. Abigail felt a rush of empathy, so fierce as it stung her eyes. But she didn't pity him. Pity was poison. She placed her hand on the side of her belly. Sometimes, Abigail said softly, it doesn't hurt exactly. It's just a surprise. A little reminder that I'm not alone in here. And yes, I think this one is going to be stubborn too. Will kept his eyes on the floor. But he nodded, a tiny, barely perceptible movement. He walked over to her. He held out the crumpled letter. You should keep this, Will said. His voice was gruff, trying to rebuild the wall, in case someone else calls you a liar. Abigail took the paper. Their fingers brushed. His hand was cold. Thank you. Will, she said. He didn't say, you're welcome. He just turned and walked past her, out of the room and down the stairs. Abigail sat on his bed for a long time. She looked at the letter. The boy was smart. He was hurting, but he sought the truth. He didn't want to hate her. He just wanted things to make sense again. He wanted his mother. That evening, when Silas returned, the house smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. Will was setting the table. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't slamming the plates either. Silas washed his hands at the pump. He came inside. He looked at the table. He looked at Will. Then he looked at Abigail. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The air in the room was lighter. The crushing tension of the first night had fractured. After dinner, when Will went up to read, Abigail brought 2 mugs of coffee into the study. Silas was at his ledger again. She set the mug down. She placed the crumpled letter beside it. Silas looked at the paper, then at her. Will found it, Abigail said. He went through my pockets. He read it. Seth's brow darkened. I will speak to him about snooping. Don't, Abigail said quickly. Let it be. He needed to see it, Silas. He needed to know I wasn't trying to make a fool out of you. He confronted me. We talked. He understands. Silas picked up the letter. He folded it carefully. neatly. He opened the top drawer of his heavy oak desk. He placed the letter inside, right next to a small silver locket. He closed the drawer. "Truth is a strong foundation, Abigail," Silas said. He picked up his coffee. "Better than bricks, better than wood. It's the only thing that lasts out here." Abigail smiled, a real smile. It reached to her eyes. "I know," she said. She turned and walked out of the study. For the first time since she boarded that train in Ohio, Abigail Stanton felt like she could finally stop running. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There was still the town to face. There was still a child to prepare. But she wasn't standing on the ice anymore. She was standing on solid ground. 3 days passed. The Montana frost turned to hard ice. The ground went stiff. It crunched under a man's boots like broken glass. Inside the Vance Ranch, things settled. A new rhythm took hold. It was a quiet, careful dance. Abigail cooked. She cleaned. She mended shirts. She didn't ask for much. She didn't complain about the draft in the kitchen or the ache in her back. Silas worked the cattle. He rode the fence lines. He chopped wood until his shoulders burned. But he watched her. He watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. He saw the way she held her back straight, even when she was tired, especially when she was tired. Will was watching, too. The boy hadn't magically forgiven the world. Grief doesn't work like that. It doesn't wash off in the rain. But the ice in him was cracking. The letter had done that. The truth had done that. He didn't run when Abigail walked into a room anymore. He sat at the table for supper. He didn't speak much, but he ate the food she cooked. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw a person, not an invader. It was a fragile piece. Then came Friday, the day the outside world came knocking. Silas was out by the barn. He was fixing a busted leather trace. The sun was high, but it offered no heat. He heard the sound of wheels before he saw the dust. A black buggy rolled up the long dirt drive. 2 fine bay horses pulled it. The rig was polished, expensive. It didn't belong on a working ranch. Silas knew the rig. Every man in Millhaven knew it. Martha Higgins. Martha was a widow, rich, pious. She ran the town's moral compass with an iron fist. She was the self-appointed judge, jury, and executioner of Millhaven's social standing. If Martha Higgins smiled at you, you were safe. If she didn't approve of you, the town didn't approve of you. You couldn't buy flour on credit. You couldn't sit in the front pews at church. Your children played alone. Silas dropped the leather trace. He wiped his hands on a rag. He walked toward the main house. He didn't hurry. He just walked. Deliberate. Steady. The buggy rolled to a stop right in front of the porch. The driver, a young man hired from town, jumped down to help Martha out. She wore a heavy black coat, a hat with a stiff brim. Her face was pinched. Her eyes were like 2 black stones, dropped in a snowbank. Cold, hard, unforgiving. Abigail was on the porch. She had been sweeping the floorboards. She stood there, the broom in her hand. Her cloak wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her belly swelled beneath the wool. There was no hiding it, not from Martha Higgins. Martha didn't say hello. She didn't offer a polite greeting. She walked right up to the edge of the porch steps. She looked at Abigail. She looked her up and down like a rancher inspecting a diseased calf. "So, the rumors are true," Martha said. Her voice was sharp. It cut right through the cold air. Abigail didn't flinch. She gripped the broom handle. She kept her chin up. "Good morning to you, too, ma'am." "Do not speak to me," Martha snapped. She turned her head. She looked at Silas as he walked up. "Silas Vance, you have lost your mind. Your poor, dear Maggie is spinning in her grave to bring this filth into her home, where her son sleeps." Silas stopped at the bottom of the steps. He stood between Martha and the porch. He stood between the town and Abigail. Mrs. Higgins, Silas said. His voice was flat, empty of any warmth. You are trespassing. State your business or turn that rig around. Martha scoffed. She planted her cane into the frozen dirt. My business is the decency of this town, Silas. You are a respected man, a pillar of this community. We will not allow a woman carrying a bastard child to live among us. She has no place in a decent society. You must send her back today. The wind blew. It rustled the dead grass. Will stepped out onto the porch. He stood next to Abigail. The boy looked at Martha. He frowned. Silas looked at Martha. He looked at her expensive coat. He looked at her hard, self-righteous eyes. He felt a deep, ugly sickness in his stomach. This was the world he had lived in. This was the world he had accepted. A world that measured worth by the appearance of perfection. Not anymore. Silas took a step closer to Martha. He towered over her. The decency you speak of is nothing but hypocrisy, Mrs. Higgins, Silas said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low rumble, like thunder miles away. You sit in your fine house and you judge who gets to be human. You judge who gets to be treated with dignity. You are wrong. Human rights are not distributed based on your approval. They are not a prize you hand out at church on Sunday. Martha gasped. Her hand went to her chest. Nobody spoke to her like this. Not the mayor, not the pastor, nobody. She is a sinner, Martha spat. She is a mother, Silas fired back. The rumble turned into a crack. She is a human being, and she is standing on my land. You do not get to strip away her humanity just because it offends your delicate sensibilities. Equality and respect are not conditional. Get off my property now, and don't you ever come back. Martha S. mouth opened and closed. She looked like a fish pulled onto the ice. She looked at Silas. She looked at Will. She looked at Abigail. She saw no fear. She saw a wall, a solid, unbreakable wall. You will regret this, Silas Vance, Martha hissed. The whole town will turn its back on you. Let them, Silas said. He didn't move until Martha climbed back into her buggy. He watched the driver snap the reins. He watched the rig turn around and speed back down the dirt road, kicking up a trail of dust. Silas stood there for a long time. The dust settled. The silence returned. He turned around. He looked at Abigail. She was still gripping the broom. Her knuckles were white, but her eyes were dry. She was breathing hard. You didn't have to do that, Abigail said softly. She'll ruin you in town. I don't care about the town, Silas said. He walked past her. He went into the house. He walked straight to his study. He grabbed his heavy coat. He grabbed his hat. He walked back out. Will, Silas said, saddle the roan. I'm going into Millhaven. Will didn't ask questions. He just ran to the barn. Silas, wait, Abigail said. She reached out. She stopped her hand before it touched his arm. Don't go looking for a fight. Not for me. I'm not looking for a fight, Abigail, Silas said. He looked down at her. His eyes were fierce, determined. I'm looking for the lawyer. I'll be back by supper. He rode hard. The roan was a good horse, strong. It ate up the miles between the ranch and the town. Millhaven was busy. Friday afternoon. Wagons lined the muddy main street. People walked the wooden boardwalks. When Silas rode in, the talking stopped. People stared. The gossip had already spread. Martha Higgins worked fast. Silas ignored them. He didn't look left. He didn't look right. He tied his horse in front of a brick building. The sign on the window read, Horace Miller, attorney at law. Silas pushed the door open. The little bell rang. Horace Miller was a small man. Thin hair, thick glasses. He lived his life in paper and ink. He liked rules. He liked order. He looked up from his desk. He saw Silas. He swallowed hard. Silas, Horace said. He stood up. He wiped his ink-stained hands on a towel. I heard, well, There's a lot of talk today. I don't pay you to listen to talk, Horace, Silas said. He pulled off his gloves. He threw them on the desk. I pay you to write contracts. Pull up the Vance marriage papers. Horace blinked. He scurried to a heavy iron filing cabinet. He pulled a thick manila folder. He laid it on the desk. He opened it. The mail order bride contract, signed by Mildred Sterling, signed by Silas. Here it is, Horace said. Do you want me to draft the annulment? Breach of contract? I can have it done in an hour. We can send her back on the morning train. No, Silas said. He walked around to the desk. He stood next to the little lawyer. He tapped his thick, calloused finger on the paper. I want the date changed, Silas said. We are not waiting till spring. We are getting married immediately. Draft the final license. And I want an addendum added to the bottom. Horace picked up his pen. His hand was shaking slightly. An addendum. All right. Stating what? Stating that the child Abigail Stanton is carrying will take my name, Silas said. His voice was absolute iron. The child will be legally recognized as a Vance, with all the rights and protections that name carries in this territory. Horace dropped the pen. It clattered against the wood. Ink splattered on the blotter. Silas. Wait. Hold on. Horace stammered. He pushed his glasses up the nose. Do you understand what you are doing? Legally? You are claiming a child that is not yours, a child born out of wedlock. The town, society, they won't accept this. It is highly irregular. It is social suicide. Silas leaned over the desk. He put both hands on the wood. He stared Horace down. Write it down, Horace. Silas, as your friend, I have to advise you against... Write it down, Silas repeated. He didn't raise his voice. He just dropped the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. You are worried about society. I am worried about a child. Just do your job. Horace picked up the pen. He dipped it in the inkwell. He started writing. Silas waited. He watched the ink dry. He signed his name where Horace told him to sign. He paid the man in silver coins. He took the folded papers. He put them in the inside pocket of his coat, right over his heart. He walked back out on to the street. The sun was starting to set. The shadows were getting long. A few men were standing outside the saloon. They looked at Silas. They muttered to each other. Silas stopped. He turned. He looked straight at them. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, challenging them. The men looked away. They went inside. The saloon doors. Schwux. Silas untied his horse. He rode home. It was dark when he reached the ranch. The stars were out, millions of them, hard and bright against the black sky. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house. It smelled like burning pine. He put the roan in the stall. He brushed the horse down. He fed it. He took his time. He needed the cold air to clear his head. He walked up to the house. He stomped the snow off his boots. He went inside. The kitchen was warm. A lantern burned low on the table. Supper was kept warm in the oven. Will was already upstairs. Abigail was sitting in the rocking chair by the hearth. She had a pile of mending in her lap. But she wasn't sewing. She was just staring into the fire. She looked up when he walked in. You're late, she said. I had business, Silas said. He took off his coat. He hung it on the peg. He walked over to the table. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the folded legal papers. He placed them flat on the oak wood. Abigail stood up. She walked over to the table. She looked at the papers. She looked at Silas. What is this? She asked. Our marriage license, Silas said. We go to the preacher on Sunday. It's done. But there's something else. He tapped the bottom of the page. The addendum. Abigail leaned forward. She read the words Horace Miller had written in his cramped, neat handwriting. She read them once. She read them twice. She reached out and touched the paper. Her fingers traced the ink. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wide. The strong, unbending woman he had seen on the porch that morning was suddenly breathless. "Silas," she whispered, "you gave my child your name. Legally." "Yes." "Why?" The word cracked in her throat. "I didn't ask you for this. I only asked for a roof. I only asked for a job. I didn't ask you to claim my shame." "It is not shame," Silas said. He stepped closer to her. He didn't touch her. He just stood near her, grounding her. "Listen to me, Abigail," Silas said. His voice was steady. It was the absolute truth. "I am not marrying you out of pity. I am not doing this to be a martyr. And I am not doing this to spite the town, though that is a fringe benefit." Abigail let out a shaky breath, halfway to a laugh, halfway to a sob. "I am doing this because it is right," Silas continued. He looked down at her belly, then up into her eyes. "I am doing this because every child born into this world has an equal right to hold their head high. That is a fundamental human right, not a privilege. It is not something earned by the wealth of their father or the approval of their neighbors. It is theirs by birth." Abigail closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "Society will brand this child," Silas said. "They will try to make him feel small. They will try to make him feel less than human, because they are cowards. But they won't do it with the law on their side. Not anymore. This child is a Vance. My name is a shield, and I am giving it to you." Abigail opened her eyes. She looked at this rough, quiet, massive man, a man she had met less than a week ago, a man who had looked at her ruin and decided to build a fortress around it. "You are a good man, Silas Vance," she said softly. "I am a practical man," Silas replied. He turned away. He walked toward the oven to get his supper. "A child needs a name. A ranch needs a family. It's just good sense." He wouldn't look at her. He didn't want her gratitude. Abigail stood by the table. She looked at the legal paper. She laid her hand flat against it. Then she moved her hand to her belly. The baby kicked, strong and sharp. Abigail smiled. The wind howled outside. The ice thickened on the windows. The town of Millhaven was sharpening its knives. Martha Higgins was plotting her revenge. The winter was going to be long, and it was going to be brutal. But inside the Vance house, the fire was roaring. And for the first time in her life, Abigail Stanton felt truly, entirely indestructible. They married on a Tuesday. There was no white dress, no flowers, no organ music echoing through the rafters. Just the small, drafty office of the town preacher. Horace Miller stood in the corner as the witness. He kept his coat on. He looked nervous. Silas wore his Sunday suit. It smelled of cedar and old wool. Abigail wore her heavy gray dress. The preacher read the vows quickly. He didn't look either of them in the eye. He just wanted it done. He wanted them out of his church before Martha Higgins found out he had performed the ceremony. Silas didn't hesitate. He said the words loud and clear. Abigail said them softly, but her voice didn't shake. When it came time for the ring, Silas pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. It wasn't his first wife's ring. He had bought this one in town, an hour before the ceremony. He slid it onto Abigail's finger. His hands were rough, calloused warm. They signed the ledger. Silas paid the preacher. They walked out into the freezing wind. That was it. They were man and wife. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of the town, they were outcasts. They rode back to the ranch in silence. The snow was starting to fall again. Thick, heavy flakes that covered the wagon tracks as soon as they were made. When they got back to the house, the silence settled in. It wasn't the angry, heavy silence of that first night. It was a careful silence, a practical one. They had to figure out how to live together. Silas set the rules without saying a word. He took his belongings out of the main upstairs bedroom. He moved them into a small room off the kitchen. It was meant for a hired hand. It had a narrow cot and a small stove. Abigail watched him carry his heavy trunk down the stairs. She stood on the landing. "You don't have to do that," she said. Silas paused at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at her. "Yes, I do. You need the big bed. You need the space. And you need your privacy." He walked into the small room and shut the door. That set the tone. Absolute respect. Absolute boundaries. The winter hit hard the second week of December. The Montana sky turned the color of bruised iron. The snow piled up past the windowsills. The wind screamed through the valley, rattling the heavy timber of the ranch house. The world shrank. It became just the three of them. Silas, Abigail, Will, trapped inside a wooden box surrounded by a sea of white. Survival out here took routine. Routine kept you sane. Silas woke at 4 in the morning. He built the fires. He made the coffee. He bundled up and fought his way out to the barn to break the ice in the water troughs and feed the stock. Abigail woke at 5. She cooked the breakfast: oats, bacon, biscuits thick with butter. By the time Silas and Will came stomping back through the mudroom, smelling of wet wool and horses, the food was hot and ready. They ate. They washed the dishes. They worked. Abigail took over the mending. Silas's work shirts were torn. Will's trousers were wearing thin at the knees. She sat by the fire in the parlor, her needle flashing in the lamplight. Silas spent the indoor hours fixing harness leather, oiling his boots, sharpening the axes. They didn't talk much about the past. They didn't talk much about the future. They talked about the wood supply. They talked about the flour rations. They talked about the ice on the roof. It was a machine. And it worked. But a machine doesn't have a heart. A house needs a heart to become a home. The heart started beating in the afternoons. Because of the snow, Will couldn't ride the 4 miles into Millhaven to the schoolhouse. Silas tried to teach him fractions at the kitchen table, but Silas was a man of action, not a teacher. He lost his patience. Will shut down. The math book sat unopened. Abigail watched this for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she intervened. "Let me," Abigail said. She poured Silas a fresh cup of coffee and gently pulled the math primer away from Will. "My father was an educated man. I helped him run a schoolroom before the war. I know how to teach." Silas looked at her. He looked at Will. He nodded. He took his coffee and went to his study. Will slumped in his chair. He crossed his arms. He glared at the primer. "I hate numbers. They don't mean anything." "I agree," Abigail said. Will blinked. He looked up at her. "You do?" "Numbers on a page are just ink," Abigail said. She closed the primer and pushed it to the side. "We will get to them later. If you are going to learn, you need to learn something that matters. Wait right here." She walked heavily up the stairs. The baby was growing fast. Her back ached constantly. She came back down, carrying a thick, leather-bound book. The gold lettering on the spine was faded. She set it on the table in front of Will, the tales of King Arthur and his knights. "What is this?" Will asked. He reached out and touched the worn leather. "History, legend, adventure," Abigail said. She sat down across from him. "My father read this to me when I was your age. It teaches you more about the world than fractions ever will. Open it." Will opened the book. The pages smelled old, sweet and dusty. "Read the first page aloud," she instructed. Will started reading. He stumbled over the old English words at first. Abigail corrected him gently. She didn't scold. She just guided. By the end of the first chapter, Will wasn't slumping anymore. He was leaning forward. His eyes were tracking across the pages, quickly. He was hooked. They fell into a new routine. Every afternoon, While the snow raged outside, the kitchen turned into a castle. They read about swords, about dragons, about honor and betrayal. Abigail didn't just listen. She asked questions. She made him think. She asked him why a character made a certain choice. She asked him what he would do in that situation. She was teaching him how to read a book, yes, but she was also teaching him how to read the world. Silas noticed. He didn't say anything, but he found reasons to be near the kitchen in the afternoons. He would sit in his study with the door cracked open. He would stand on the mudroom porch, fixing a latch that didn't really need fixing. He just listened to the sound of her voice. Clear, patient, alive. He listened to his son asking questions. Will hadn't asked questions in 6 years. He had just existed in a state of quiet anger. Now, the boy was waking up. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late January. The wind was particularly vicious. The sky was nearly black by 3 o'clock. Abigail and Will were sitting by the great stone hearth in the parlor. A massive fire roared in the grate, throwing orange light across the room. Will had the heavy book in his lap. Abigail was knitting a small white blanket. They were reading the story of a knight who was vastly outnumbered. The knight was facing an entire army to protect a bridge. He knew he was going to lose. He stood his ground anyway. Will finished the chapter. He closed the book reverently. He stared into the fire. "That is true bravery," Will said. His voice was full of awe. "Why do you say that?" Abigail asked. Her knitting needles clicked softly. "Because he knew he was going to get hurt," Will said. "He had a sword, and he had armor, but he knew they were going to beat him. He stayed anyway. Only men can be that brave, riding into battle like that." Fighting. Abigail stopped knitting. She let the white yarn fall into her lap. She looked at Will. The boy was young. His mind was still forming. He was soaking up the world around him, and the world had told him that strength was physical, that courage was violence. It was time to correct the record. Outside the parlor door, Silas was walking down the hall. He had just come in from the cold. His boots were heavy. He stopped when he heard Abigail's voice change. It lost its soft, storytelling lilt. It became firm, anchored. "Look at me, Will," Abigail said. Will turned from the fire. He looked at her. "What you just described is bravery." "Yes," Abigail said. Her words were measured, rhythmic. "Standing against an army takes courage. But you're wrong about one very important thing." "What?" Will asked. "You think courage requires a sword," Abigail said. "You think it requires physical strength, and you think it is a trait reserved only for men. That is a lie the world tells to keep things simple. But the world is not simple." Will frowned. He was trying to follow. "But women don't go to war." "War is not the only battlefield," Abigail said. She leaned forward. The firelight caught the fierce intelligence in her eyes. She made sure every word landed. She spoke clearly, articulating a truth she had paid dearly to learn. "Courage isn't just for men with swords, Will," Abigail said, her voice ringing clear in the quiet room. "Sometimes, true courage is a woman choosing to keep her child when the whole world turns its back. Men and women are absolute equals when it comes to bravery. Bravery is doing what is right when it costs you everything. It is standing your ground for a righteous cause, regardless of your gender, regardless of your strength. Do you understand me?" Will stared at her. He looked at her swollen belly. He remembered the letter he had read in his room. He remembered the story of the men who had tried to buy her child. He remembered the way she had stood on the porch and faced down Martha Higgins without a flinch. He had thought she was just a pregnant woman who needed a place to stay. Now, he realized he was sitting across from a warrior. "I understand," Will said softly, and he meant it. You're brave, like the night. Abigail smiled. The fierce tension left her shoulders. She picked up her knitting needles. We all have our bridges to defend, Will, she said quietly. You just have to decide which ones are worth standing on. Out in the hallway, Silas stood, frozen in the shadows. He had heard every word. The words hit him like a physical blow to the chest, not out of anger, out of profound realization. Men and women are absolute equals when it comes to bravery. He had spent his whole life in a society that treated women like fragile glass or mindless property. He had protected his first wife, Maggie, like a delicate flower. And when the harsh reality of the West had broken her, he had blamed himself for not being a strong enough shield. He hadn't treated Maggie like an equal in the fight for survival. He had treated her like a liability. He looked through the crack in the door. He looked at Abigail. She was sitting in the rocking chair, her pregnant belly heavy, her hands working the yarn. She had been betrayed. She had been cast out. She had boarded a train with nothing but a suitcase and a lie, heading into the unknown wilderness. And she hadn't broken. She hadn't surrendered. She had stood on her bridge. Silas felt a sudden, fierce rush of pride. Not the pride of a husband possessing a wife, the pride of a soldier recognizing a comrade in the trenches. He stepped back quietly. He walked heavily toward the kitchen, making just his body thud loud against the floorboards so they would know he was coming. He walked into the parlor a moment later. He carried two mugs of hot cider. He handed one to Will. He handed the other to Abigail. He didn't mention what he had heard. He didn't have to. He looked at Will. Did you finish the chapter? Yes, Will said. The knight held the bridge. Good, Silas said. Turned his gaze to Abigail. His blue eyes were not cold. They were not distant. They were warm, and they held a depth of respect that words could hardly measure. Thank you for the cider, Silas, Abigail said. You're welcome, Abigail, he replied. He didn't leave the room. He didn't go back to his study or out to the mudroom. He pulled up a heavy wooden chair and set it near the fire, right beside her rocking chair. He sat down. He stretched his long legs out toward the hearth. What happens in the next chapter? Silas asked. Will's eyes lit up. He opened the heavy book again. He found his place. He started reading. The wind howled outside. The snow battered the windows. The temperature dropped far below zero. But inside the Vance house, the ice was finally gone. They weren't just two strangers honoring a contract anymore. They weren't just surviving the winter. They were learning how to live together, equal in the warmth of the fire, equal in the quiet courage it took to build something new from the ruins of the past. The winter deepened. The ice on the river froze thick enough to hold a loaded wagon. But the weather wasn't the coldest thing in Millhaven. The people were. The town had made its decision. Martha Higgins had drawn the battle lines, and the good, God-fearing folks of Millhaven fell right into step behind her. They didn't come out to the ranch. They didn't wave when Silas rode by. They just pulled their coats tighter and looked the other way. It was a freeze-out, a slow, quiet attempt to starve them out of polite society. It started at the Mercantile. It was a Tuesday. They needed flour, coffee, and salt. Silas hitched the team to the sleigh. He drove Abby into town. The bells on the harness jingled bright and clear. It was a pretty sound. But when they stepped onto the wooden boardwalk in front of Miller S. Mercantile, the town went dead silent. Silas opened the heavy door. A little bell rang up top. Abigail stepped inside. The store smelled of kerosene, peppermint sticks, and old leather. It was warm. The pot-belly stove was glowing orange in the center of the room. Half a dozen women were gathered around it, knitting and talking. Martha Higgins was right in the middle. The moment Abigail walked in, the talking stopped. Every head turned. Eyes dropped to the heavy swell of her belly beneath her winter cloak. Then those eyes snapped away. One by one, the women stood up. They gathered their skirts. They turned their backs. They formed a solid, woolen wall of disapproval. Mr. Miller, the store owner, was behind the counter. He was a nervous man. He looked at Martha S. back, then he looked at Silas. He started to wipe down the counter with a dirty rag. Silas S.'s jaw tightened. He took a heavy step forward. Abigail put her hand on his arm. A gentle touch, just enough to stop him. "I have this, she said quietly. She walked up to the counter. Her boots clicked against the floorboards. Steady, even. She didn't hurry. She didn't slouch. She stood tall, carrying her child like a badge, not a burden. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Abigail said. Her voice was clear. It carried perfectly over the silence in the room. The clerk swallowed hard. "Morning, ma'am. What can I do for you?" 50 pounds of flour, 10 pounds of your dark roast coffee, and a sack of coarse salt, she said. Miller nodded. He started gathering the goods. He wouldn't look her in the eye. "And a tin of those peppermint drops, please," Abigail added. "For Will." She pulled her coin purse from her pocket. She counted out the silver dollars. She laid them on the glass counter. They clinked loud in the quiet room. Miller bagged the goods. He slid them across the counter. He took the coins. "Thank you." "Mr. Miller," Abigail said. She picked up the peppermint tin. Silas picked up the heavy sacks. They walked out of the store. The little bell chimed again. As soon as the door clicked shut, the buzzing started. Like a hive of angry hornets, the whispers bled right through the frosted glass. Silas loaded the sleigh. He looked at Abigail. Her face was pale. The cold wind bit at her cheeks, but there were no tears in her eyes. "They are fools," Silas said. "They are scared," Abigail corrected him. She climbed up into the seat. "They are scared of anything that breaks their rules. If they admit I am a decent person, they have to admit their rules are wrong. People don't like being wrong, Silas." He clicked the reins. The horses moved out. "They will break," Silas said. "Eventually." "Maybe," she said. "But I will not break while we wait." 3 days later, the sound of a buggy rolled up the ranch drive. Silas was out back. Abigail looked out the kitchen window. It wasn't Martha Higgins. It was a man, older. He carried a worn black leather bag. Dr. Samuel Beckett. He tied his horse to the post and walked up to the porch. He knocked. Abigail opened the door. "Mrs. Vance?" the doctor asked. He tipped his hat. He had kind eyes surrounded by deep wrinkles. He smelled of pipe tobacco and strong soap. "Yes, doctor," she said. "Silas asked me to come by. Said it was time for a check on the child." Abigail stepped aside. "Come in. It is freezing out there." Dr. Beckett walked into the warm kitchen. He took off his coat. He didn't look around with judgment. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like a medical professional. They sat in the parlor. He checked her pulse. He felt the position of the baby. He listened to the heartbeat through a wooden stethoscope. He worked with quiet efficiency. "The baby is strong," Dr. Beckett said. He packed his instruments back into his black bag. "Heartbeat is steady. You are carrying well. Mrs. Vance, how is your back?" "It aches," Abigail admitted, "especially in the evenings." "That is the gravity of motherhood," he said with a small smile. "Rest when you can. Silas is a good man. Let him do the heavy lifting." He snapped his bag shut. He stood up. "Doctor," Abigail said. He paused. "You didn't ask me any questions," she said, "about the town, about the rumors." Dr. Beckett put his hat on. He looked at her evenly. "I was a surgeon in the Union Army, Mrs. Vance," he said. "I have seen the very worst of what human beings can do to one another. I have seen men torn apart by grape shot. I don't give a damn about parlor gossip. My job is to bring life into this world, and to keep it here as long as I can. You are a healthy woman. You are carrying a healthy child. That is all that matters in my ledger. He tipped his hat again. I will see you in a month, Mrs. Vance, unless you need me sooner. He walked out. Abigail sat in the rocking chair. She placed her hand on her belly. Mrs. Vance. He had called her by her legal name. He had treated her with absolute, unwavering respect. It was a small thing, just a title, just a doctor, odd job. But in a town determined to strip her to nothing, it felt like a heavy shield. Sunday arrived. Sunday was the battlefield. Silas didn't ask if she wanted to go to church. He just brought the wagon around. They dressed in their best clothes. Will put on his stiff collar and combed his hair. We don't hide, Silas told Will on the ride into town. Vances don't hide. They walked into the white-steepled church just as the bell stopped ringing. The pews were packed. But as they walked down the center aisle, people shifted. They pulled their coats in. They leaned away. Silas found an empty pew near the back. He sat on the aisle. Will sat in the middle. Abigail sat on the inside. The preacher gave a fiery sermon about the wages of sin. He looked at the ceiling a lot. He looked at the back pew a lot. Abigail didn't look down. She looked right back at him. She kept her chin up. She listened to the words, and she let them wash right over her. They were just words. They had no power to change the truth. When the service ended, the congregation spilled out into the cold, crisp air. People gathered in small clusters in the churchyard. They talked about the weather. They talked about the cattle. They ignored the three Vances walking toward their wagon. Martha Higgins was standing near the church steps. She was holding court. Beside her was her youngest boy, little Tommy. He was 8 years old, full of energy, running around the icy churchyard in his Sunday boots. "Tommy, stop running," Martha called out. "It's slick." Boys never listen. Tommy took a running start toward a patch of hard black ice near the steps. He meant to slide across it. He hit the ice. His boots went out from under him. He went up in the air and came down hard. There was a sickening crack. It wasn't hyper-speaking. It was bone. Tommy let out a scream that cut through the Sunday chatter like a hunting knife. It was a high, shrill sound of pure agony. The townspeople froze. Then panic set in. Martha screamed and ran to her boy. Tommy thrashing in the snow. He was clutching his right arm. It was hanging at a gruesome, unnatural angle. His shoulder was completely dislocated, deformed. "Fetch Dr. Beckett," Martha shrieked. "Somebody get the doctor." "He's not here, Martha, mister," Miller yelled back. "He rode out to the Miller farm this morning. Baby coming early. He won't be back till nightfall." Martha fell to her knees in the snow. She grabbed Tommy S.'s left hand. The boy was hyperventilating. His face was stark white. His lips were turning blue from the shock and the pain. "Help him," Martha cried out. She looked at the men standing around. "Somebody fix it." The men shuffled their feet. They were ranchers. They knew how to set a calf-ass leg, but a child was different. If they pulled it wrong, they could tear the nerves. They could cripple the boy for life. Nobody wanted that blood on their hands. Nobody moved. Abigail moved. She let go of Silas S.'s arm. She pushed her way through the crowd of staring, useless adults. "Move," she said. It wasn't a request. It was an order. A woman tried to step in front of her. "You stay away from him." Silas S.'s massive hand landed on the woman S.'s shoulder, moving her aside like a piece of furniture. "Let her through." Abigail dropped to her knees in the snow right across from Martha. Martha clutched her boy tighter. "Get away! Don't you touch him! You're cursed!" Abigail ignored her. She looked right into Tommy's wide, terrified eyes. "Tommy," Abigail said. Her voice was suddenly incredibly soft, soothing, like warm honey. "Look at me. Right here. Look at my eyes." The boy sobbed, but his eyes locked onto hers. "I know it hurts," Abigail said. She reached out with gentle, steady hands. "My father was an army doctor. He taught me how to fix this exact thing. I am going to make the pain stop, but I need you to be brave for 1 second." "Can you do that?" Tommy hiccuped. He gave a tiny, jerky nod. "Good boy," she murmured. Abigail didn't hesitate. She knew exactly what to do. She had done it in army tents. She had done it on the schoolyard. She slipped her left hand under his armpit. She clasped his forearm firmly with her right hand. "Now, Tommy, I want you to take a deep breath and blow it out like you're blowing out a candle," she instructed. The boy inhaled shakily. He blew out. The moment his chest dropped, Abigail pulled. She applied a sudden, smooth, firm traction downward, and then rotated the arm inward.
Pop.
It sounded like a heavy cork going back into a bottle. Tommy gasped. The agonizing, screaming tension instantly melted from his body. His arm dropped naturally against his side. The joint was back in place. The boy blinked. He looked at his arm. He looked at Abigail. The color started rushing back into his face. "It's better," Tommy whispered. Abigail smiled. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and wiped the tears from his freezing cheeks. "You were very brave. Keep that arm still today. It will be sore, but it is fixed." The churchyard was dead silent. The wind whistled through the bare trees. Martha Higgins sat in the snow. She stared at Abigail. Her mouth was open. The absolute terror in her chest was gone, replaced by a crushing, humiliating realization. The woman she had tried to ruin, the woman she had called filth, had just saved her son from permanent injury, while the rest of the decent town stood by and watched. Martha scrambled to her feet. She pulled Tommy up with his good arm. She looked down at Abigail, who was still kneeling in the snow, brushing the ice from her heavy skirt. Martha's face was flushed red. She looked around at the crowd. They were all watching her. She looked back at Abigail. "Thank you," Martha muttered. The words looked like they physically hurt her to say. She looked at the ground. "I suppose I owe you a debt of gratitude." Abigail stood up. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look smug. She looked Martha Higgins dead in the eye. It was time to clear the air, not with anger, but with absolute truth. "Look at me, Mrs. Higgins," Abigail said. Her voice was firm. It carried to every person standing in that frozen yard. Martha slowly raised her eyes. Abigail spoke clearly, making sure the educational value of this moment was not lost on anyone. "You do not owe me a debt," Abigail said. "Compassion isn't a VIP club reserved for those you deem perfect, Mrs. Higgins. It is not a trade. Helping a fellow human being is our basic duty to one another. I helped your boy because he was in pain. I didn't do it to purchase your community's approval. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Your approval means nothing to me, but human suffering does." Martha recoiled slightly, as if she had been slapped. But she didn't argue. She couldn't. Abigail turned away. She didn't wait for an apology she knew she wouldn't get. She didn't care. She walked back to Silas. He was standing exactly where she left him. A fierce, quiet pride burned in his blue eyes. He offered her his arm. She took it. Together, with Will walking tall beside them, they climbed into the wagon. Silas snapped the reins. The wagon rolled out of the churchyard. The crowd parted for them. No one whispered. No one turned their backs. They just watched the Vances ride away. The town hadn't completely changed. Prejudice is a deep root. It doesn't pull up in a single day. But the freeze was over. The ice had cracked. Because a woman they had tried to break had just taught them all what it actually meant to be civilized. The sky didn't just turn dark, it turned solid. It was late November, the kind of cold that kills cattle where they stand. The barometer dropped off the table by mid-afternoon. The wind came howling down from the Canadian border, carrying a wall of white death. A blizzard, a real one. By supper time, you couldn't see the barn from the back porch. By 8 o'clock, the snow was drifted halfway up the kitchen windows. The temperature plummeted to 20 below zero. The heavy timber of the ranch house groaned and popped under the strain of the wind. They were cut off, completely. The telegraph lines in town were surely down. The roads were gone. Dr. Beckett was 4 miles away, and he might as well have been on the moon. They were on their own. Abigail went to bed early. Her back was aching, a fierce, deep ache. Stayed up. He kept the fires blazing. He dragged extra cords of wood into the mudroom. You didn't sleep soundly during a storm like this. You kept a watch. Midnight came and went. The house shook. Then, over the roar of the wind, Silas heard it. A sharp, sudden gasp. Then a heavy thud from the floorboards upstairs. He dropped his coffee mug. He took the stairs 2 at a time. He threw open to the big bedroom. Abigail was on her knees by the bed. She was gripping the wooden bedpost so hard her knuckles were bone white. She was breathing in short, ragged gasps. Silas dropped to his knees beside her. Abigail. She looked at him. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. It's too early, she whispered. Her voice shook. Silas. It is 7 weeks too early. But it's coming now. Silas felt a spike of ice drive straight into his heart. He had been in this room before, 6 years ago. He had watched his wife labor. He had watched the life drain out of her. He knew what could go wrong, and that had been with a doctor in the room. He pushed the fear down, deep down. He locked it away. He stood up. He lifted Abigail off the floor. She was heavy, but he was strong. He laid her gently on the bed. We are going to do this, Silas said. His voice was absolute rock. I am right here. He ran to the door. Will, he bellowed down the hall. Will, get up. A door opened. Will stumbled out in his long johns, rubbing his eyes. He stopped. He saw his father's face in the lamplight. The boy woke up instantly. Put your boots on, Silas ordered. Sharp, fast. Your stepmother is having the baby. Go to the kitchen, stoke the fire, boil every pot of water we have. Then bring up the clean rags from the pantry. Go! Will didn't ask questions. He ran. Silas went back into the room. He stripped off his heavy coat. He rolled up his sleeves. He washed his hands in the cold basin water. The next 3 hours were a blur of pain, sweat, and firelight. The wind screamed outside. Inside, the only sounds were Abigail's ragged breathing and Silas's steady voice. He talked her through the pain. He held her hands. He wiped her forehead with a damp cloth. Will ran up and down the stairs. He brought hot water. He brought rags. He kept the fire in the bedroom hearth blazing hot. The boy was terrified. His face was pale as milk. But he didn't freeze. Silas gave him orders, and the boy followed them. It kept him moving. It kept him sane. At 3 in the morning, the wind hit a fever pitch. Push, Abigail, Silas commanded. One more time. I see the head. Push! Abigail let out a cry that tore through the room. She clamped her eyes shut. She gripped Silas' forearm with the strength of a drowning man. She pushed with everything she had left. With a rush of fluid and blood, the baby slipped into Silas's waiting hands. It was tiny, far too small. Silas quickly wiped the baby's face with a clean rag. He cleared the mouth. He waited for the sound, the beautiful, chaotic sound of a newborn crying. Silence. The wind howled. But inside the room, there was nothing. Silas felt his stomach drop into his boots. The baby was blue, limp, It wasn't breathing. Silas? Abigail gasped, falling back against the pillows. She was exhausted, barely conscious. Silas, why isn't he crying? Silas didn't answer. He turned the baby over. He rubbed its back vigorously with the towel. He tapped the bottom of the tiny feet. Nothing. Not a gasp, not a twitch. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Silas's throat. He rubbed harder. Come on, he muttered. Come on, breathe. Will was standing by the door. He was holding a basin of hot water. He dropped it. The basin hit the floor. Water splashed everywhere. The boy ran forward. He looked at the blue silent infant in his father's hands. He's not breathing, Will said. His voice hitched. I know, Silas snapped, desperation leaking into his voice. He patted the baby's back again. He's too early. Will stared at the baby. Then his eyes widened. The panic vanished from the boy's face, replaced by a sudden, tense focus. Wait, Will said, the book. Silas didn't look up. Will? Step back. No, Pa. Listen. Will grabbed his father's thick arm. The book Abby showed me. The medical journal from her father. The Army doctor. I read a chapter last week. About the battlefield. About men who stopped breathing. Silas stopped rubbing. He looked at his son. Put him flat, Will ordered. The 12-year-old boy was suddenly the most authoritative person in the room. Silas hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he laid the tiny infant flat on the clean sheets. Will stepped up. He didn't hesitate. He remembered the diagram. He remembered the text. Abigail had made him read aloud. He tilted the baby's tiny head back slightly to open the airway. He pinched the microscopic nose shut. He took a breath. He placed his mouth completely over the baby's mouth. He blew. A short, gentle puff of air, just enough to make the tiny chest rise. He pulled back. He waited. He counted to 3. He blew again. Gentle, steady. Silas watched, paralyzed. Abigail turned her head on the pillow, watching the baby breathe his own life into her child. Will blew a 3rd time. Then he pulled back. The baby's chest shuddered. A tiny, jerky movement. Then the baby coughed. It was a weak sound, but it was a sound. Will backed away, gasping for air himself. The baby's chest heaved. The blue color started to recede, flushed out by a sudden wave of angry, pulsing red. The infant opened its mouth, scrunched up its face, and let out a wail. It wasn't a loud cry. It sounded like an angry kitten, but it was the most magnificent sound Silas Vance had ever heard in his life. Silas closed his eyes. His massive shoulders slumped. He let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 6 years. He quickly wrapped the crying baby in a warm, dry blanket. He turned to the bed. He placed the bundled infant onto Abigail's chest. Abigail wrapped her arms around the squirming bundle. Tears streamed down her face. She looked at the baby. Then she looked across the bed at Will. Will, she sobbed softly. Oh, Will, thank you. Will stood there. He was shaking. His hands were trembling. He looked at the baby, then at his father. Silas walked around the bed. He didn't pat his son on the shoulder. He didn't just say, "You good job." He pulled Will into a tight, crushing hug. He buried his face in the boy's hair. When Silas pulled back, he kept his hands firmly on Will's shoulders. He looked his son dead in the eye. The firelight flickered across their faces. Silas needed to make sure the boy understood exactly what had just happened here tonight. "You listen to me, Will," Silas said. His voice was thick with emotion, but every word rang clear and true. "You proved something profound tonight. Something most men live their whole lives without learning." Will looked up, his chest still heaving. "What, Pa?" "You proved that love is greater than blood," Silas said deliberately. "Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. But what you did right now, that was sacrifice. That was compassion. That was you choosing to save a life that didn't share your name until a week ago. Blood does not make a family, Will. Love makes a family. Responsibility makes a family. You gave your brother his right to live tonight. Will swallowed hard. He looked past his father. He looked at the tiny baby resting against Abigail's chest. The crying had settled into a quiet, rhythmic breathing. "He's my brother," Will whispered. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a fact. "Yes, he is," Silas said, "because you made it so." Outside, the blizzard raged on. The wind screamed, and the snow buried the world in ice. But inside that room, the cold had been permanently broken. They had survived the storm, all four of them. The morning came quiet, too quiet. The wind had finally stopped. The blizzard had blown itself out, leaving behind a world buried in 4 feet of pristine, blinding white snow. It took Dr. Beckett 2 days to dig his way out to the Vance ranch. He arrived behind a team of plow horses, his face raw from the cold. He hurried into the house, expecting the worst. He found Silas drinking coffee at the kitchen table, and Will sitting by the fire, reading a book aloud to a bundle of blankets. Dr. Beckett dropped his bag. He hurried upstairs. When he came back down an hour later, he looked stunned. "I don't believe it," the doctor said. He poured himself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. A 7-month baby, born in a blizzard, no medical equipment, and he is breathing clear as a bell. The lungs are small, but they are strong. Silas took a sip of his coffee. He had a good doctor. He looked over at Will. Will didn't look up from his book, but the tips of his ears turned red. "What did you name him?" Dr. Beckett asked. Abigail answered from the top of the stairs. She was moving slowly, leaning on the banister, but she was smiling. "James," she said. "James Will Vance." Will stopped reading. He closed the book. He looked at Abigail. "You gave him my name?" Will asked softly. "I gave him the name of the man who saved his life," Abigail said. She walked down the stairs. "I thought it was only fitting." The weeks that followed were different. A profound shift had occurred in the timbre of the house. The silence was gone. It was replaced by the sounds of a newborn, the midnight cries, the soft coos, the rustle of blankets. Will was utterly devoted. The moment his chores were done, he was by the basket. He didn't mind the crying. He didn't mind the mess. He would sit for hours, letting the tiny infant wrap a microscopic fist around his index finger. Silas changed too. The hard, pragmatic shell he had worn for 6 years began to crack. He didn't just come in from the cold and retreat to his ledger. He lingered. One afternoon, Silas brought a large block of smooth, cured pine wood into the parlor. He set it near the hearth. He brought his carving knives and his rasps. For the next 2 weeks, while the snow kept them indoors, Silas carved. He didn't speak much while he worked. The rhythmic scrape of the steel blade against the wood filled the room. Wood shavings curled onto the rug, smelling sharp and sweet. He was building a crib, not a box, a proper crib. He carved smooth spindles. He sanded the edges until they felt like glass. He built rockers for the bottom, perfectly balanced so it would sway with the gentlest push. It was a labor of pure, unadulterated devotion. It was late December when he finished it. Will was asleep. James was asleep in his temporary basket. Abigail was sitting in the rocking chair by the fire. The flames cast long shadows against the walls. Silas rubbed the last coat of linseed oil into the wood. He wiped his hands on a rag. He sat back on his heels and looked at it. "It's beautiful, Silas," Abigail said softly. "It is the finest thing I have ever seen." Silas didn't smile. He stared at the crib. The firelight caught a sudden, deep sadness in his eyes. A sorrow so old and heavy, it seemed to weigh down his broad shoulders. "I built one for Will," Silas said. His voice was barely above a whisper. 6 years ago, just like this one. Abigail stopped rocking. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. Maggie picked the wood, Silas continued. He was staring into the fire now, looking at ghosts. She loved pine. Said it smelled like the mountains. She was so happy. He swallowed hard. His hands gripped the rag. When the fever hit her, it hit fast, Silas said. The words were pouring out now, the dam finally breaking. It was winter, like this. Dr. Beckett was out of town. The only doctor nearby was an army surgeon stationed at the fort. A Union man, a Northerner. Silas bowed his head. His voice cracked. I hated the army. I hated Northerners. I let my pride make the choice. I refused to let that man cross my threshold. I told myself I could sweat the fever out of her. I told myself strong enough to fix it. He looked up. His blue eyes were bright with unshed tears. The pain of a man confronting his absolute worst failure. I killed her, Abigail, Silas whispered. My prejudice killed my wife. I sat in this room and watched her die because I was too arrogant to ask a man from a different state for help. I was a failure as a husband, and I have carried that failure every single day since. The room was painfully quiet. Only the crackle of the burning wood broke the silence. Most women would have offered pity. Most women would have told him it wasn't his fault, that it was God's will. They would have offered him a soft lie to make him feel better. Abigail Stanton was not most women. She stood up. She walked over to where he was kneeling by the crib. She knelt down right in front of him. She reached out and took his large, calloused hands in hers. She looked him dead in the eye. Listen to me, Silas Vance, Abigail said. Her voice was strong, clear, resonant. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering truth. You made a terrible mistake, Abigail said directly. You let a label blind you to a man's worth, and it cost you dearly. You cannot change that. Apologies cannot rewrite the past. Silas closed his eyes, accepting the blow. But Abigail continued, her grip on his hands tightening, forcing him to open his eyes and look at her. That mistake does not define the man sitting in front of me today. Healing doesn't mean the scar disappears, Silas. It means the wound no longer dictates your future. She reached up and touched the side of his weathered face. Look at what you have done since I arrived, she said. Her voice carried the explicit weight of the lesson he needed to learn. You took in a ruined woman. You shielded a child that wasn't yours. You faced down the bigotry of this entire town because you knew human dignity mattered more than their gossip. The man who let his wife die out of prejudice is dead. The man who lives here now is a man who respects human life above all else. Your remorse proves you learned the lesson. Your compassion is what heals you. Silas stared at her. His chest heaved. For 6 years, he had been waiting for someone to punish him. He had been punishing himself, but Abigail hadn't punished him. She had held up a mirror and forced him to see that he had grown, that he had changed, that the pain had not been for nothing. A single tear escaped his eye and tracked down through the dust on his cheek. He let go of her hands. He reached up and gently wrapped his arms around her. He pulled her close. He buried his fist in her shoulder. He didn't sob out loud. He was still a Western man, but he held onto her like a man clinging to a lifeline in a raging river. And for the first time in 6 years, Silas Vance allowed himself to be forgiven. Abigail held him. She stroked his back. She let him let go. The ice in the house was completely gone. The winter raged outside, but inside, the thaw was absolute. They had built a foundation on truth. Now, they were finally building a home on grace. February brought the false spring. The snow melted during the day, turning the ranch yard to thick, heavy mud, only to freeze solid again at night. Inside the Vance house, the baby thrived. Little James was growing fast. Will was his shadow. Abigail found her rhythm. Silas found his peace. The house hummed with a quiet, steady warmth. Then the past came knocking. It was a Tuesday. Silas was in the barn, graining the horses. He heard the sound of wheels breaking through the frozen mud of the driveway. It wasn't a supply wagon. It was a hired carriage from the livery in town, black lacquer, polished brass, pulled by two matched grays. Silas stepped out of the barn. He wiped his hands on a rag. He watched the carriage roll to a stop in front of the house. A man stepped out. He wore a fine wool suit, a silk cravat, a bowler hat. His boots were clean, but they wouldn't stay that way long in Montana. Nathaniel Prescott. Silas didn't know the face, but he knew the type. Soft hands, hard money, a man who bought his way out of trouble. Silas walked toward the carriage. He didn't hurry. He moved like a rock slide, slow, inevitable. Nate turned. He looked at Silas. He looked at the massive shoulders, the calloused hands. Nate swallowed hard. He straightened his coat, trying to find his courage and the cut of his wool. "I am looking for Abigail Stanton," Nate said. His voice was polished, educated, and completely out of place. Silas stopped 10 feet away. He crossed his arms over his chest. "There is no one here by that name," Silas said. Nate frowned. "Don't play games with me, man. I have a private investigator's report. I tracked the marriage broker. I know she is here, and I know she had the child." "Abigail Vance lives here," Silas corrected him. His voice was flat, cold as the wind. "My wife and my son," Nate mushed up. It was an ugly, arrogant sound. "Your son, please?" "We both know the truth. I received word it was a boy, a male heir. My family requires the child. I have a court order from Ohio, and I have the funds to make this easy for everyone." Silas didn't blink. He didn't shout. He took one step forward. Just one, but it was enough to make Nate take a step back. "You have no heir here," Silas said. The words dropped like anvils. "You abandoned a woman. You tried to starve her out. You are a coward. You have exactly 1 minute to get back in that carriage before I show you how we deal with cowards in this territory." Nate's face flushed, red with anger, red with embarrassment. "You cannot keep him from me," Nate spat. "I am his biological father. The law is on my side. I will see you in court, Mr. Vance." "If you want to talk law," Silas said, "you go to Horace Miller's office in town. You wait there. I will be down in an hour. But if you ever set foot on my land again, I will break your jaw." Nate looked inside Silas' eyes. He saw no bluff. He saw a promise. Nate climbed back into the carriage. He shouted at the driver. The carriage tore out of the yard, throwing mud in its wake. Abigail stepped out onto the porch. She was holding James. She had seen through the window. She was shaking. Silas walked up the steps. He put his large hand over her trembling shoulder. "It was him," Abigail whispered. "He wants the baby." "He gets nothing," Silas said. "Go back inside. Lock the door. Keep Will close. I am going to town." Silas rode hard. The wind bit at his face. He didn't feel it. He felt a deep, boiling rage. He tied his horse outside Horace Miller's office. He kicked the door open. The little bell shattered against the glass. Horace jumped up from his desk. Nate Prescott was sitting in the client chair. A slick-looking lawyer from back east was standing beside him. "Silas," Horace stammered, "Mr. Prescott here had presented some complicated paperwork." "Show it to me," Silas demanded. The Eastern lawyer sneered. "These are sealed affidavits, Mr. Vance, proving paternity, along with a complete background investigation into Miss Stanton's family history to prove she is unfit." "Show it to me," Silas repeated. He walked right up to the lawyer. He didn't ask again. The lawyer cleared his throat and slid a thick manila folder across the desk. Silas opened it. He flipped through the pages. Pages of lies. Pages of wealth trying to rewrite the truth. Then he stopped. He stared at a single page. It was Abigail S. family record. Her Father S. military file, included to somehow prove a lack of stable upbringing. Dr. Harrison Stanton, Major, United States Army Medical Corps, stationed, Fort Ellis, Montana Territory. Winter, 1872. Silas stopped breathing. The words swam on the page. The room spun. Fort Ellis, 1872. 6 years ago. The winter, Maggie died, the Union doctor stationed at the fort. The man, Silas, had refused to let cross his throat because he wore a blue coat, because he was from the North. Abigail's father. The papers slipped from Silas' hands. They scattered across the floor. Nate smiled. He thought Silas was defeated by the legal threat. You see, Mr. Vance, you have no standing. The boy is a Prescott. Silas didn't hear him. The roar of his own heartbeat was deafening. He turned around. He walked out of the office. He didn't say a word. He left the door wide open. He rode home in a trance. The guilt. The crushing, suffocating guilt. It wasn't just that he had killed his wife with his prejudice. It was that God, or fate, had brought the daughter of the very man he had spurned right to his door. He had married her. He had claimed her child. It felt like a cosmic joke, a brutal reckoning. He walked into the ranch house. The fire was burning. Abigail was at the stove, stirring broth. Will was reading to James. It was a perfect picture, and Silas felt like a poison in the middle of it. He took off his hat. He walked to the center of the kitchen. Abigail, Silas said. His voice was hollow, empty. She turned. She saw his face. She dropped the wooden spoon. Silas? What happened? Did the lawyer say he can take him? No, Silas said. He can't take him. The addendum holds. We fight it in court. Then what is it? She asked. She walked toward him. She reached for his hand. Silas pulled his hand away. He couldn't let her touch him. Not yet. Not when she knew. Your father, Silas said. The words felt like ground glass in his throat. Dr. Harrison Stanton. He was stationed at Fort Ellis in 72. Abigail stopped. She looked confused. Yes, that was his last post before he retired. How did you know that? Silas looked at the floorboards. Then he forced himself to look her in the eye. He owed her the truth. The brutal, ugly truth. 6 years ago, my wife Maggie caught the fever, Silas said. His voice shook, but he locked his jaw and pushed the words out. The town doctor was gone. The only man who could save her was the surgeon at Fort Ellis. A rider went to fetch him. He was ready to come. Abigail's eyes widened. She started to put the pieces together. But I sent the rider back, Silas said. He stepped backward, putting distance between them, condemning himself. I told them I didn't want a Yankee butcher touching my wife. I hated the North. I hated the uniform. I judged the man by his label, not his skill. Will stopped reading. The whole house went dead silent. Silas spoke the explicit truth of his sin, making sure the lesson was laid bare. My garbage prejudices killed my wife Abigail, Silas said. His voice broke. I judged a man by his regional label instead of his capability. It was the absolute sin of arrogance. I let my pride murder the woman I loved. Your father could have saved her, and I turned him away. Abigail stood perfectly still. The fire cracked behind her. Silas waited for the anger. He waited for her to scream. He waited for her to pack her bags and leave. He deserved it. He deserved to lose everything. Abigail looked at him for a long time. She looked at his broad, shaking shoulders. She looked at the devastation in his blue eyes. Then she took a step forward. Silas flinched. She took another step. She reached out. She took up both his large, trembling hands in hers. She held them tight. Look at me, Silas, Abigail said. He couldn't. Look at me, she commanded. Her voice was iron and velvet. Silas raised his eyes. She wasn't looking at him with hatred. She was looking at him with an intense, fierce grace. She spoke clearly. She made sure he heard every single syllable. She made sure the truth of human redemption was spoken aloud in that room. "My father lost patience in the war," Abigail said softly. "He told me once that the greatest tragedy isn't making a mistake. The greatest tragedy is refusing to learn from it. You made a terrible, arrogant choice 6 years ago. You let prejudice rule you." She squeezed his hands. "But your remorse right now proves you've learned the true value of human respect," Abigail continued. Her words rang with absolute conviction. "Apologies cannot rewrite the past, Silas. Beating yourself to death with guilt won't bring Maggie back. But your accountability today is what matters. You judged my father by his label. But when I came to you, ruined, pregnant, and disgraced, you didn't judge me by mine. You judged me by my character. You protected me. You claimed my son. You are not the man you were 6 years ago." Silas let out a jagged breath. A tear broke loose and tracked down his weathered face. "You forgive me?" Silas whispered. He couldn't believe it. "I do," Abigail said, "because the man standing in front of me isn't a man of prejudice anymore. He is a man of honor, and he is the father of my child. Now, wash your hands. We have a fight ahead of us, and I need my husband." Silas pulled her into his arms. He buried his face in her hair. He held her like a man who had been drowning and finally found the shore. The past was finally buried. The ghosts were laid to rest. Tomorrow they would face the town. Tomorrow they would face the judge. But tonight, foundation of the Vance house was finally, permanently unbreakable. March came in like a lion. The wind battered the stone walls of the county courthouse in Millhaven. The courtroom was packed. Every pew was full. Standing room only in the back. The whole town had come to see the spectacle. Martha Higgins sat in the second row, her face tight. Mr. Miller, the grocer, sat near the back. Nate Prescott sat at the plaintiff's table. He looked smug. He wore a tailored suit. His Eastern lawyer sat next to him, arranging thick stacks of paper. They looked like money. They looked like power. Silas and Abigail sat at the defense table. Horace Miller sat beside them, sweating through his collar. Abigail wore her simple blue dress. She held her head high. Silas sat next to her, a mountain of quiet strength. Will sat right behind them in the first pew, holding baby James wrapped in a thick blanket. The judge was an old man named Harrison. He had a white beard and no patience. He banged his gavel. "The court calls the matter of Prescott versus Vance," Judge Harrison barked. "Mr. Prescott, you claim paternity of the infant currently residing with the Vances. You seek full custody." Nate's lawyer stood up. He spoke for 20 minutes. He talked about biology. He talked about bloodlines. He talked about the Prescott family wealth, the schools the boy would attend, the life of privilege he would lead in Ohio. He painted Abigail as a fallen woman who had fled her responsibilities. He made it sound like they were trying to rescue a stolen piece of property. Then it was the defense's turn. Horace Miller stood up, his knees knocked together. He presented the marriage contract. He presented the addendum. He stammered through the legal precedent of the Montana Territory regarding children born within a legal marriage. The judge looked bored. He looked at the paperwork. "Legalities are fine, Mr. Miller," the judge said gruffly, "but we have a biological father here claiming his right to his flesh and blood carries weight." Silas didn't wait for Horace to bungle the response. Silas stood up. He didn't ask permission. He just rose. His massive frame blocked out the light from the window. The courtroom fell dead silent. Silas walked around the table. He stood directly in front of the judge's bench. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Nate. He looked the judge in the eye. "Your Honor," Silas said. His voice filled the large room. It wasn't loud, but it possessed an absolute, undeniable authority. "Mr. Vance," the judge warned, "you have counsel. My counsel deals in paper." "I deal in reality," Silas said. He pointed a thick, calloused finger back toward Nate Prescott. "That man over there is talking about bloodlines and bank accounts," Silas said. "He is talking up this child like he is a prize bull to be bought and sold at auction. He claims a right to a boy he tried to buy his way out of knowing." Nate jumped up. "Objection! This is slander." "Sit down, Mr. Prescott," the judge snapped. "Let him speak." Silas turned back to the judge. He laid out the absolute truth. He made sure the educational core of his argument was spoken clearly, so every person in that room understood what was at stake. "A father is not defined by biology." "Your Honor?" Silas said. The words rang out, rhythmic and heavy. "A father's not defined by a few drops of reckless blood left behind in the dark. Fatherhood is earned. It is earned through the daily grind of love, respect, and duty." Silas pointed to the back pew, where Will was rocking the sleeping baby. "When that child was born in the middle of a blizzard, it wasn't the Prescott wealth that made him breathe. It was my family. It was my son. When that child cries in the night, it is not Mr. Prescott who walks the floorboards. It is me. The law exists to protect the vulnerable child, Your Honor. It does not exist to shield the fragile egos of wealthy men who only show up when the hard work is done." Silas placed both hands on the wooden rail of the bench. "My name is on that birth certificate," Silas concluded. "He is a Vance, not by an accident of nature, but by a deliberate choice of love, and I will not let a coward buy him away." Silas turned around. He walked back to his table and sat down. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the snow hitting the window glass. The judge looked at Silas. Then he looked at Nate Prescott. He looked at Nate's soft hands and his expensive suit. The judge picked up his gavel. "Biology is a fact of nature, Mr. Prescott," the judge said. "But fatherhood is a fact of character. You surrendered your character the day you tried to pay a woman to disappear. The marriage addendum is legally binding in the territory of Montana. The child is legally James Vance. Case dismissed." The gavel slammed down like a gunshot. The courtroom erupted. Not in outrage, but in a sudden, shocking wave of applause. The people of Millhaven, the same people who had frozen Abigail out, were clapping. Martha Higgins wasn't clapping, but she wasn't protesting either. She just stood up and quietly left the room. Nate Prescott was furious. He shoved past his lawyer. He marched over to the defense table. Silas stood up, ready to block him, but Abigail put her hand on Silas's chest. She stepped around him. She faced the man who had ruined her life, and she felt nothing but pity. Nate reached into his coat. He pulled out a thick leather wallet. He pulled out a stack of large bills. "Listen to me, Abigail," Nate hissed. He was desperate. He was losing. "I will give you $10,000. Right now. You leave this dirt farmer, you give me the boy, you can start a new life anywhere. You don't have to live in this frozen hell." He shoved the money toward her. Abigail looked at the cash. Then she looked at Nate. She smiled, a true, genuine smile of absolute freedom. She spoke loudly. She wanted the lingering crowd to hear. She wanted the truth spoken one last time. "You still don't understand, do you, Nathaniel?" Abigail said. Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of everything she had learned. "My dignity and my son's future are not for sale. They never were." Human dignity can never be bought or traded away. You have a wallet full of money, but you are the poorest man I have ever met. Go back to Ohio. We have a ranch to run. She turned her back on him. She linked her arm through Silas's arm. They walked down the aisle together. Will followed close behind, holding baby James. Nate stood alone in the empty courtroom, holding a stack of useless paper. April arrived, and the true spring finally broke over the Montana Valley. The snow melt rushed down the mountains, filling the creeks with crystal clear water. The frozen ground softened. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. Behind the Vance ranch house, a patch of dirt had been cleared. It was late afternoon. The sun was warm. Will was sitting on the porch, showing James how to hold a wooden block. The baby was laughing. Abigail was kneeling in the dirt. She was using a small trowel to turn the soil. Maggie's old garden. She was preparing the beds for planting. Silas walked around the side of the house. He had been fixing the pasture gate. He stopped and watched her. She wore a simple cotton dress. Her hands were covered in dirt. A stray lock of hair fell across her forehead. To Silas, she was the most beautiful thing the world had ever produced. He walked over to the edge of the garden. He took his hat off. Abigail looked up. She shielded her eyes from the sun. She smiled. The soil is good. We can plant the carrots next week. Abigail, Silas said. His voice was different. It wasn't the rough bark of a rancher. It wasn't the flat tone of a man making a contract. It was soft, vulnerable. Abigail stopped digging. She stood up. She wiped her hands on her apron. What is it? Silas looked down at his hat. Then he looked at her. We made a contract, Silas said, back in November, a business arrangement for the ranch for Will. I remember, she said softly. The winter is over, Silas said. He took a step closer to her. He stepped right into the garden. The fight with Prescott is over. The town has backed off. You are safe here. You will always be safe here. He reached out. He gently took her dirt-stained hand in his large, calloused one. But I don't want a contract anymore, Silas said. His blue eyes searched her face. I want a wife, not a housekeeper, not a partner in a ledger. I want you. I want you because I love you. And I want to know if you want to stay because you choose to, not because you have to. Abigail looked at the man who had saved her, the man who had faced down his own demons to build a fortress for her child, the man who treated her as an absolute equal. She reached up with her free hand. She rested it against his rough, unshaven cheek. I choose to, Abigail whispered. I love you, Silas. I choose this bridge. Silas closed his eyes. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a promise, a sealing of a bond that no winter, no town, and no law could ever break. May 1879. Dear Father, I am writing this letter, knowing I cannot send it to you, but I need to put the words on paper. I came to this territory broken. I came running from a society that told me I was ruined, and from a man who told me I was worthless without his money. I expected the West to be harsh. I expected to survive, but I did not expect to live. I was wrong. I found a man who did not care about the labels the world tried to place on me. Silas Vance taught me that human dignity can never be bought or traded away. And I taught him that mutual respect and equal love are the greatest remedies of all cures that the law could never even hope to touch. Will is growing into a fine young man. He is reading your medical journals now. He says he wants to be a doctor. I think he will be a brilliant one. And James. Little James is thriving. He has his father's eyes. I mean Silas, of course, because Silas is his father in every way that matters. You always told me that ruins are not the end of a city. They are just the foundation for the next one. We have built something beautiful here, Father. Built it on truth. built it on grace. I am safe, I am respected, and I am finally truly home. With all my love, Abigail Vance.
As the sun finally rises over the snow-blanketed Montana plains, the Vance Ranch stands quiet and steadfast, a sanctuary shaped not by wealth, not by status, but by courage, compassion, and unshakable integrity. In the harshest winter, in the face of judgment from the entire town, Silas Vance and Abigail Stanton have proven something far greater than survival. They have shown that love and humanity are not defined by blood, tradition, or the whispers of society. They are defined by the choices we make when the world tests our character. Abigail, who came with nothing but a suitcase, a secret, and a heart full of hope, stood tall against prejudice and fear. Silas, who has known loss and hardship, chose not the easy path of conformity, but the harder path of justice and empathy. And young Will, witnessing the courage of both adults, learned the most important lesson of all, that bravery is not measured by swords or fists, but by standing for what is right, even when it costs you everything. This story teaches us that family is more than biology. It is forged through acts of love, protection, and selflessness. It reminds us that integrity matters more than reputation, and that compassion is not a luxury, but a duty. We see that true courage often comes quietly, in the midst of storms, both literal and figurative, in moments when it would be easier to turn away. But choosing to stay, to fight for what is just, and to care for the vulnerable, that is where real heroism lives. The Vance's journey is a testament to the enduring power of human dignity, the strength found in unity, and the transformative impact of empathy in a world that can often seem cold and unyielding. For all of us, their story is a mirror and a guide. It challenges us to stand for others, to see the humanity in every person, and to recognize that the measure of a life well lived is not the ease of one's path, but the courage, kindness, and love we extend along the way. In the end, the Montana snow may fade, the winds may calm, and the harshest winters may pass, but the lessons of integrity, bravery, and compassion endure forever, warming the hearts of those willing to listen and to act.